To interview Dr. John Dirks, the director of the COMGAN program for the International Society of Nephrology. This interview is a part of the ISN Video Legacy program of the History Commission of the International Society of Nephrology. So, John, can you tell us a bit about how the CME programs of COMGAN are currently working and maybe some of the recent highlights?
Well, Kim, since we last spoke, I think it's about 2 years ago, COMGAN has reached a very interesting plateau of activity. Over the last 2 years, we have been in each one of those years in about 30 places in each year. And the meetings have been anywhere from 25 to 30 people to up to 2,000. The usual size is probably around 200 to 300. Usually held with national meetings. But the interesting point is that in each one of those last 2 years, the CME has been directed at 11,000 physicians globally. So if you were to say, what is the largest annual nephrology meeting that takes place? It's indeed this very dispersed CME meeting that ISN holds through its commission, COMGAN, in many places. And I believe it's probably a forerunner of a way nephrology education will take place in large part in the future.
And as far as we know, there is nothing comparable to this in other areas of medicine that we're aware of, so we seem to be the leader.
I believe we are the leader, and I'm not aware that there's any other group that's doing this so extensively. I know of one other group, the International Diabetes Federation, which has a number of meetings with national societies, but nothing on this organized scale and on this regular workings with national organizations.
Now, in the past 2 years, I think there are some new facets. There's the niche courses in some special areas of interest. There's the research facet of COMGAN and also the education facet. Do you want to tell us a bit about those?
Yes. First of all, let me take the niche courses. At each one of our CME meetings, something is done differently every time. It depends what the local interests are, what they feel is needed, what's required. But we've had more and more requests for specific and more in-depth presentations, workshops on topics such as renal pathology. And for example, in Dubai in February of 2001, we had an outstanding 2-day pathology course conducted by Jan Vening of Amsterdam and Helmut Renke of Boston. You and Michelle gave a course on computers, particularly at the working level, where you had a number of sessions asking the question of the attendees, how do you access various websites dealing with nephrology knowledge? Others have come up, and particularly, of course, presentations relating to dialysis, hemodialysis especially, but also PD, and transplantation come up all the time. In Russia, this coming summer, in end of May, we will have again a pathology course and an in-depth course in fluid and electrolytes, which will be the first one of its kind we've done there. So the niche courses, of which I've just given you several examples, are being requested more and more. So that's been, I think, a change, and I see more of that happening. One thing that's related to COMGAN, of course, is the development of the model sister centers, and that's still early on, and maybe the next time we talk that'll be much further developed. But the idea was that among the many sisters relationships that we had, some 150, between a center in developing land and one in a developed land, there wasn't enough of a resource underpinning, and that we should in fact find some small amount of money that would aid in travel aid in meeting certain goals, whether it was assistance with a computer, whatever. And we now have 6 such centers, such as the one between Ghent and Belgium, Dr. Lemaire, and Dr. Kuznikas, I think it is, in Kaunas, Lithuania. Others are between Havana and Madrid, Toronto and Madras, to mention 2 more. So this is a growing program, and we're hoping that this can in fact be greatly enhanced with regular relationships of higher order. And we discussed this very day here, conferencing that might be a particular adjunct. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of education, there has been this question as to what is the optimal training in nephrology that should take place. We know what it is here in Canada, what it is in the United States, what most of the European countries carry out, but it varies a lot in many countries. It can be a full program like we're accustomed to, but in some countries it can be as little as 6 to 12 weeks in a subspecialty. There's not the tradition, there's not the time, there isn't the structure, there isn't the availability of resources to have these detailed programs. But nevertheless, we've got requests from many lands saying, what would the ISN recommend? It's not to say that we would certificate, it's not that we would exclude anybody because they didn't have this training, but we would try to make it present in such a manner that we would encourage others to develop more comprehensive and training programs that would be similar in quality, would be as encompassing, but hopefully would take into account their own special nephrology needs. For example, I bet you right here in Alberta you don't talk an awful lot about malarial kidney disease or schistosomiasis in the kidney. Well, these happen to be important topics in countries like Nigeria and Egypt, and so I would feel that any training program would have to take that into account. We have a committee co-chaired by Michael Field of Sydney, Australia, who's an experienced medical educator, and Asker Rastegar, who has been a big help to us in Iran, but also is an associate dean for education at Yale and is very involved in postgraduate training. And they have put together a committee which is truly global, and have gathered information from many lands, and this is going to be the basis of their guidelines that they'll be developing in short order. So the next time we meet, I may be able to give you a fuller account as to what's happened. Mm-hmm. But this is, again, at the request of the countries where the COMGAN has been active and coming from the participants and leaders that are there.
Right. Now, research and the research initiative, I think this is also exciting.
We've just started in this, at the early part of this year, 2001, a research committee headed by Beppe Ramuzzi of Italy. And he has in his committees very well-known clinical researchers such as Barry Brenner of Boston, Dick Dezou of the Netherlands, Bill Keane of the United States, Wendy Hoy of Australia, and a number of others who are very much involved in clinical research, especially in terms of the newer information that has perhaps really crystallized in this year relating to specific interventional preventive measures that can be instituted in order to delay progression of chronic renal disease or hopefully even in some instances preventing it by careful control of blood pressure, glomerular pressure in turn, reducing proteinuria through ACE inhibitors or angiotensin receptor blocking agents, and by very careful control of glycemia and diabetes. We're all very concerned about the momentous rise in the incidence of diabetes which is taking place at our time, and the predictions right now that this will move from around 130, 150 million people as is now to about 300 million within the next 10 to 20 years is alarming, especially in developed countries where often developing countries where often the incidence of nephropathy can be 40% of all the diabetic patients. So this will not eliminate the need for renal replacement therapy, but it may slow down the rate at which it increases, and at least keeps the economic costs in check. So this is going to be a mission of the ISN, which will involve education. It involve doing studies in selected countries to test these observations further, and Dr. Ramuzzi has already done some of this in Bolivia. Dr. Wendy Hoy has done this in the island of Tiwi, which is just off Australia. And so I think you're going to hear this more as a mission, where a society actually is going to give a stamp and say, when it comes to kidney disease, we want to give a warning. It's not quite like stop your smoking, right, stop your drinking, but it is in the sense of saying you can do something, you're not trapped. But obviously this raises issues in developing countries in terms of having the people on the ground to do this, and meeting costs of many pharmaceuticals which are still patented and which are expensive. So this is the challenge. But I think this is something that the society is latching onto with great enthusiasm.
We'll be interviewing Dr. Brenner, and this program, COMGAN, started as a joint effort of the two of you. Can you tell us a little bit about how he fit into this, and how did the two of you start this?
Well, I think we've been very complimentary at the time, and we were asked as a result of a vision that I think particularly Stuart Cameron and Bob Schreier had, to develop a commission that would largely be involved in education of the CME type in developing countries. And I think that has succeeded and has become much more than that. But we were asked, and we've known each other for a long time, going back to briefly at the NIH, but really never being in the same place and never being co-authors on papers, but developing a friendship and a communication over the many years, which I think then served us well when we began as partners on this commission. And we both went to many countries. Initially at that time I was in Pakistan as a dean, and Barry carried more of the load, and then when I came back in '96 I took on more of this, but it was a very satisfactory and excellent partnership. And I think one of the attitudinal approaches that we took was not to wait. Not to wait until somebody would write from Thailand or somewhere else and say, why don't you come and get involved with us here? We in fact would ask. We would go and visit. We would have site visits and meet the nephrologists, see the centers, see the level of development, and develop friendships and relationships. And that model, very simple model, has, I think, served us well. And that's why today I think we have this enormous network of colleagues and friends in nephrology all over the world. We could then offer, after having made that initial contact, the opportunity that we're happy to come. We'll be actually we're definite, we're coming to your next year's meeting if you'll have us. And so this has all grown in that fashion, and a very salutary relationship.
Where do you see COMGAN going, say, in the next 4 years? What do you think there will be then that's not now? Or
I think the continuing medical education, the nephrology courses will continue at least on the same scale as today, and perhaps even somewhat more. And we will just become better organized and hopefully better financed to carry this out. Right. And I think there will be many more targeted courses at people's requests relating to some of the topics I mentioned before, like hemodialysis, fluid and electrolytes, renal pathology, biopsies, special techniques. I think that will continue to grow. I think we will continue to attract important fellows, and I did mention this earlier, the ISN having this excellent fellowship program of 30 fellows a year. When we go to the meetings, many of the young people hear about the program and therefore make the initial contact that later leads to them being associated with a mentor and receiving their training. And this has been, I think, one of the particularly strong developments of ISN overall. I think the sister relationships hopefully will be better funded and in terms of making more of them work in pairs and doing the sort of thing we talked about today, and regular contact, teleconferencing, more training, more assistance in developing some of their needs. I think the prevention program will be widely known. I think we'll have made it a priority to spread that message around extensively. I hope we will have been successful in engaging a number of the world aid agencies that just as important to get people to stop smoking and to improve maternal mortality, early childhood death, which are terribly important. But also that one must look now to the non-communicable diseases, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and including kidney disease, among others, that this is now emerging and will be emerging as a ever-increasing main killer in the world, and will play a very significant role. I hope we will in fact infect, as it were, some of the sister medical subspecialty society. That's one of our goals, to go and do likewise, as it were. And I think that's one of the roles we would have, is by example, by experience, to demonstrate to other medical specialty societies that they should be out there. You know, I'm not referred to my sort of view of the developing world. There is the view that one should never bring high tech. One should never bring sophisticated education. I disagree with that personally because of personal experience in Pakistan and the other many other places that I and others have been. In that the goals that the World Health Organization and the World Bank and other agencies like that have had to alleviate poverty, improve literacy, deal with early childhood and maternal care are terribly important. They must be continued. In fact, the current world crisis that we face this fall in 2001 indicates that, if anything, more of that has to happen. But I think when you go to these countries and realize that these same diseases occur, are increasing: hypertension, diabetes, other cause of chronic renal disease, acute renal failure, the need for transplantation, and so on, they should be able to do at least some of that at home. They will preserve their trained professionals better. They will keep the patients home who might otherwise spend large amounts of their money or government money to go abroad. And I think it's part of a country maturing and as a segment of nation building, in my opinion. So I have this bimodal view of the developing world. All the good things, all the right things that the major aid agencies are for, dealing basically with all the spin-offs of poor economic development and poverty. But side by side, to have a certain degree of more sophisticated development in the interests of building up that country and dealing with their own particular disease problems. So I think we'll also have advanced in terms of 4 or 5 years from now in having better interactions on renal replacement therapy, via transplantation, hemodialysis in various countries. I think we'll have improved greatly our ability to disseminate knowledge through the close cooperation we have with Dirks Commission and the Informatics Commission, is to stop sending heavy paper books and to distribute electronically the information which can be as easily transmitted to Nigeria from Edmonton as it can be to Toronto, and arrive there virtually at the same time, and reduce greatly the long time gaps that there used to be in acquiring knowledge. I think that'll be greatly advanced during this time. So, but it's very hard to look into a crystal ball, you know, Kim.
Yes. There are two special areas, maybe. I guess one would be the economics of renal care, that renal replacement therapy is very costly, and so it's quite variable amongst countries how they can cope with that cost. And then the whole ethical issues surrounding transplantation on the one hand and renal replacement therapy on the others. I think these are also important facets of COMGAN's mandate.
I think the cost issue is a very major problem. We're just in Ghana, Nigeria, and the usual cost of a single dialysis was $100 US. And a lot of that relates to having to import consumables from abroad, and it's very costly. Somehow, one would hope that at some point the cost of a lot of these consumables and the machinery would be reduced. This has happened in so many other fields. And obviously, if one prevents a lot of renal disease, as Lewis Thomas used to say, you could eliminate halfway technology, as he defined it. So we're trying to keep an eye on the costs. It's beyond our control, but we conference on it. We had a very excellent meeting on this 2 years ago in Buenos Aires, and we hope to repeat this in Berlin, is to look at comparative costs in different countries and see if there are any lessons to be learned. But I think it'll still, renal replacement therapy, when there's no choice, will still take place and will still consume a significant fraction of any healthcare budget. And transplantation, obviously, is much more cost-saving and in the long run, and leads the patient to a much more normal life. However, there are many hurdles to overcome there, including some of the ethical issues, cultural issues, religious issues in many countries. I think it's getting better, but we're now facing many new dilemmas with the continuing insufficiency of donor kidneys available as compared to the many who are seeking such a kidney. And this dilemma of paying for a kidney is one that has been antithetical to most of us. It's interesting how this is being confronted more and more. I think there needs to be a little bit more openness on issues such as that, including in some of the countries where there may be practices that we don't find that attractive. Obviously, one gets into this with a certain degree of care, let's put it that way, and but there's no question that when societies discuss these issues, that the word gets around and gradually leaves at least some kind of imprint. We don't have an ethics committee, and the society has perhaps not been as active in discussing some of the ethical issues relating to transplantation and renal replacement therapy. They're often little poignant episodes, and they're not so little. Just being in Ghana, one of the big problems was having a patient on dialysis who could initially maybe afford it as a result of the company paying for it 3 times a week. Then the company no longer paid for it, and they would come once a week and manage to stay alive, as it were. And then there was no more money left. And the head nurse almost wept as she told us she would face too often the situation of saying there's no more treatment available. So there are important issues of ethics and of humanity that are then confronted. And how does one deal with it? And she said, you people must come and help us in this regard. I'm not sure yet what the answers are, but they're certainly important issues. I think we're getting more into this, and I think that our society has done well by inserting itself, as it were, in a positive way, being well received, so many giving of their time, free, and making themselves available to participate in these ISN ComGen programs. We're dealing with hundreds of physicians that have been involved. When you interview the next person, it'll be interesting to see what the viewpoint is at that time about what's been accomplished.
Yes.
And what should be done.
There was a really excellent article written about ComGen a few years back, I think in KI.
Yes.
Do you have any plans for
Yes.
subsequent publication?
I think we're now due to repeat it because the story has been enlarged and the experience is much greater and more profound. And I've been asked to write an editorial for KI, and maybe that is one of the pluses, if there are any, from the current world crisis, that some of us are not traveling quite so much and there's time to stay home and write.
Yes, that's right. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about in this interview?
I think at this stage we're hoping that more people will get involved in terms of membership in our society, and there are other avenues of contributing. We've just had a program in Toronto where one hospital donated 35 code machines that are still in excellent functioning order to Cuba. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure there isn't some more opportunity in people volunteering. And so many of our society members come at some point from another country, mm-hmm. whether in this generation or the previous generation when their parents came. I would like to see much more of a practice, an inculcation, as it were, of giving something back to a country where one might have originated from. And I think this is where, if you have a society that has excellent programs underway, this would be a very good society to engage in for giving back, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you very much. And I'm very pleased we've had this opportunity to talk, and look forward to the next time.
Thank you, Kip.
Okay, thanks. Okay.